Well, this is Hank Dillon, the Bigfoot Hunter, a Hidden Corners exclusive. The Watcher in the Woods, Part 8. In the previous episode, Hank Dillon dove deeper into the shadowy operation known as Project Silva. It turned out to be a covert government program that was tracking and capturing cryptid life forms, most likely Sasquatch. Hank's brother Wade is a Denver attorney. He uncovered evidence linking the project to black budget funding at an unlisted military site in the Rockies. Meanwhile, Tom Sheffield found his old ally, Darnell Rhodes, in a remote cabin in the Catskills, where Darnell revealed explosive intel about the true scope of Project Silva. Just as Tom and Darnell tried to flee the hideout, enemy agents closed in, chasing the two men through the forest on ATVs. The ground gave way beneath Tom, if you remember, leaving him injured in a ravine while Darnell evaded the search teams. And in a final chilling moment, Hank received a cryptic message from Wade, suggesting that Project Silva wasn't merely a rogue operation. It might be tied to something far older and more dangerous than anyone imagined. And now we continue with the story. Tom Sheffield regained consciousness in the ravine. He was injured but alive. Now Darnell managed to scramble down to him with the help of a broken branch, half sliding through loose soil and pine needles to get to him. "Your leg's bad," Darnell whispered, breathless, eyes scanning the edge of the drop-off above. "Don't move." Tom grimaced through clenched teeth, trying to stay quiet. Blood was seeping through his pant leg, but he nodded. And above them, the forest was alive with sounds. Voices yelling commands and the mechanical whines, ATVs weaving through the trees. They were close. Too close. Darnell pulled Tom beneath a collapsed pine tree, its thick roots jutting upwards like gnarled fingers. Hidden beneath the dense tangle of branches, they held their breath. Boots crunched overhead. A flashlight beam swept the ravine edge, pausing only for a moment before moving on. Then voices. "You sure he didn't have a transmitter on him?" a deep voice asked, and then another replied, "No signal, he's off grid, but I know he's down there." An unnatural silence followed the voices, a lull that felt more threatening than any sound. Then came the sharp buzz of a static burst over a radio. "Base, this is Alpha. No sign of the asset. Continuing perimeter sweep." And a new voice answered, cold and digital. "Authorization granted. If found, terminate." Tom swallowed hard as he heard the man walking away. "They just called you an asset," he murmured. Darnell whispered, "I think they're referring to you, Tom." Above them, the last ATV revved its engine and tore off into the trees. For the moment, at least, they were safe. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit records room tucked beneath the Jefferson County Courthouse in Denver, Wade Dillon flipped through a decades-old federal dossier marked classified. His contact in the federal court system, who was an old college roommate turned clerk, had slipped him the case file on Earl Rollins, under the condition that Wade not tell him what he was really searching for. But what Wade found chilled him. There was no Earl Rollins. That identity didn't even exist before 2014. The man that Hank had trusted, the man who had funded the search and told tales of cryptids, of a friend vanishing in the woods and government cover-ups, was actually Dr. Franklin M. Sterling, a former DARPA biogeneticist and the founding director of Project Silva. In the margins of one file, scribbled in red ink, were the words, "Dr. Moreau, unstable, terminated with prejudice." In legal context, that meant the case was permanently dismissed. The records told a disturbing story. In the early days of Project Silva, Sterling had pushed for adoptive evolution experiments. He believed that Sasquatch, and possibly other cryptids, carried a dormant genome that could unlock human advancement. And because of that, he authorized unsanctioned testing, including hybridization protocols involving human and non-human subjects. In other words, he was trying to create a hybrid, man and beast. The experiment spiraled out of control. Congressional oversight committees were never informed, and by the time military intelligence intervened, several subjects were unaccounted for, and at least 2 field agents had disappeared. Sterling was quietly removed, stripped of all credentials, and committed to a high-security psychiatric facility in New Hampshire for 7 years. He was released 10 years ago under court supervision, diagnosed as no longer a threat to himself or others. But now he was back, with a new name and a new mission, and Hank was right in the middle of it. Wade's fingers trembled as he pulled out his phone and dialed Hank's number. "Hank, listen to me," Wade said, his voice low and urgent. "Earl Rollins isn't who he says he is. His real name is Frank Sterling. He's the guy who started Project Silva. He was fired, institutionalized. They called him Dr. Moreau." There was silence on the line. "Whatever he's told you about his friend that disappeared on a hunting trip and the Sasquatch, it's bait. I think he's trying to get you to capture one for him so he can pick up where he left off." Hank stood on the porch of his log cabin, looking out at the aspen trees lining the drive to his house. He and Michelle had returned home, convinced that enough time had been spent staying at his brother Wade's house in Fort Collins. They were ready to get on with their lives. He had dropped Michelle off earlier at her place after making sure that everything was safe, and then he had driven up to his cabin in Red Feather to check on everything. He stared ahead into the trees, and then he spoke, almost to himself. "Thanks, Wade. I guess it's time I found out just what kind of game I've been pulled into." The desert air hummed with heat outside the old adobe farmhouse near Trinidad, Colorado, Earl Rollins' so-called retreat. Inside, the man known to Hank as a quirky old outdoorsman in flannel and boots stood at a lab bench in a hidden basement, surrounded by files, tissue samples, vials of amber-colored liquid, and a wall of computer monitors that were cycling through infrared camera feeds, satellite data, and biometric trackers. Gone was the harmless, half-senile, eccentric act. Gone were the tall tales of missing hunting buddies and blurry sightings in the fog. In its place was cold, clinical focus. Dr. Franklin M. Sterling, stripped of his titles and banished by the very project he'd once birthed, was playing a new game. And it was finally coming all together. He carefully pulled a sample tray from a cryogenic chamber, its contents still labeled with faded government tags. Subject entity DNA-17-001. Well, the DNA had degraded over the years, but some strands were still viable. Not enough to clone, though. Not yet. But if Hank Dillon could bring him a fresh specimen, a living specimen. He looked over at the wall where the massive map of the Rockies was covered in pins, notes, and timestamps. Hank had been moving closer with each encounter. The algorithm Sterling had built from an old satellite patterns and migratory habits of local game had finally borne fruit. "Come on, Hank," he muttered, fingers twitching over his lab keyboard. "We're almost there. You think you're just proving it exists, but you're doing exactly what I need. You're bringing the subject to me alive." He sat back in his chair, closing his eyes, remembering a scene that happened years ago. It was October of 1998. The room was cold, inhumanly cold. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting flickering shadows on steel gurneys and biohazard containers. And Dr. Sterling stood behind a thick pane of reinforced observation glass, scribbling notes with one hand, while the other absently adjusted the drip rate of an IV containing a greenish serum labeled G-13/retro viral hybrid A. Inside the chamber was what had once been a man. Corporal Denny Ames, U.S. Army Ranger. He volunteered for the program after sustaining injuries in Kosovo. He had been promised accelerated healing, advanced reflexes, and enhanced strength and senses. What he got instead was this. Sterling's recorder clicked on. Subject is exhibiting further craniofacial elongation. Canine teeth now exceed 5 centimeters. Subject has ceased verbal communication for 72 hours. Skin has developed a thickened dermal layer resembling early-stage hyperketosis. The subject inside snarled and threw itself at the glass. Slam! The reinforced wall trembled, but Sterling didn't flinch. A pair of lab techs behind him stepped back. "Sir, containment might be compromised." "Hold," Sterling snapped. "Let it play out." On the far wall, 2 cameras rotated to follow the subject's movements. The creature, no longer recognizable as Corporal Ames, began pacing, fast and erratic, its hunched shoulders twitching with each breath. Long fingers scraped grooves into the concrete floor. "Vital signs?" Sterling asked. "Blood pressure is rising. Heart rate 211 beats per minute. Spikes in adrenal output, sir. He's approaching critical." Sterling leaned into the microphone. "Echo," he said gently. "Do you remember who you are?" The creature stopped and turned, and for a moment something flickered in its yellow eyes. Then it screamed, a gut-wrenching, blood-boiling shriek that blew out the intercom system and launched itself once more at the glass. The room lights went red. Sirens wailed. "Seal the wing," someone yelled. Sterling didn't move. He simply clicked off his recorder. Containment had failed, and the subject was terminated. Conclusion: Sasquatch DNA is unstable when fused with human genome. Mental deterioration occurs after 60 hours. Dr. Sterling sat back in his chair. His eyes were closed, but his mind was racing. What if you didn't fuse the DNA? What if you bred it? He looked up at the screen showing Hank Dillon's tracker. "Bring me the real thing, Hank. The next trial won't fail." He tapped a key, bringing up a screen showing Tom Sheffield's last known GPS coordinates in the Catskills. Then he flipped to another window, tracking Hank's own vehicle through a low-orbit satellite ping. "All the pieces are moving," he whispered. Sterling stood, moving towards a steel door with a biometric lock. Inside was a reinforced containment chamber. He didn't just want a sample this time. He wanted the creature whole, conscious, responsive, and trainable. "Humanity's next step won't come from Mars," he said to the darkened room. "It'll come from the woods, from what we left behind, and what I'll bring forward." The forest breathed with the awakening of spring, branches creaking under spring melts, ravens cawing from unseen perches. In the dense understory, a moose moved steadily through the low brush, its heavy body weaving between fallen trees and icy creeks swollen with runoff. From deeper in the forest, another figure followed, massive, silent. The Sasquatch, known to the government officials as Subject Entity 17B moved with eerie precision. At nearly 10 feet tall, covered in thick, dark, russet fur, matted with pine needles and old scars, it glided through the woods with a grace unusual for its massive size. Its long arms never brushed against a branch. Its feet found soft moss or rock with near mystic precision. The creature's nostrils flared, catching the musk of the moose. It crouched near a rise, one hand pressing into the damp forest floor as it watched the moose drink from a shallow stream. Then it froze. The wind shifted, not towards the moose, towards the creature. It sniffed again, sharply. Oil, metal, the scent of man. Without a sound, the creature backed into a dense stand of spruce and vanished. It knew these woods better than any map, better than any drone. The moose raised its head lazily, ears twitching, but it sensed none of what the creature had sensed. Above, 20,000 feet in the atmosphere, a military satellite rotated, cameras adjusting as it lost visual through the trees. Below, the hunt continued, but not the one the moose expected. Deep beneath the jagged spires of the Rocky Mountains, hidden behind a series of false trails and camouflaged access roads, lay Facility Black Dome, a black site not listed on any official registry. The entrance was nothing more than a blast-proof tunnel carved into the granite, sealed by a steel vault door disguised as a maintenance access hatch. Only a few with biometric clearance could enter, and even fewer understood the full scope of what went on within its subterranean corridors. Inside, a low hum pulsed through the complex, servers running, generators thrumming, distant electric buzzes from unseen machinery. Rows of screens lined a control room like a miniature NORAD, all dimly lit with a sterile blue glow. Men and women in tactical gear moved silently, their uniforms unmarked. Sitting in front of a bank of monitors, his eyes glued to the image appearing on the screen, Commander Lyle Nash, Field Surveillance Coordinator, held a transmission in his hands that had just arrived from the printer on his desk. It read, "Restricted communication. Operation Project Silva. Transmission log 0429, May 1, 2025. Satellite imagery confirmation. At 0416, recon satellite number 441 captured thermal and visual confirmation of subject entity 17B. Subject was observed moving east-northeast at an estimated pace of 7.3 miles per hour along a low-traffic corridor near State Route 125, 12.6 miles southeast of Walden, Colorado. Subject appears to be using dense forest and creek beds for cover. Elevation gain observed at 8,631 feet. Coordinates logged. Deploy all ground units immediately. Intercept route north via Forest Service Road 740. Monitor airspace with thermal drone. Use of tranquilization protocol S-4 authorized if direct contact occurs. Avoid lethal engagement unless subject demonstrates immediate hostile behavior." And in heavy letters, "Do not allow subject entity to cross Colorado-Wyoming border per Directive 014-SV. All confirmed contact with non-human cryptid life forms must be contained within Colorado jurisdiction. Cross-border response would trigger multi-state awareness protocol." A technician leaned over a keyboard, typing rapidly. "Subject 17B is on the move," she said. "I know," Commander Nash replied. "Bravo 4 is on it." Sergeant Cal Monroe crouched at the tree line, his breath fogging slightly in the crisp mountain air. The snow melt had turned the forest floor to a half-frozen slurry of mud and pine needles. His team, 4 men, all clad in black, faces painted to blend into the timber, moved like shadows through the lodgepole pine. "Thermal's dead ahead," whispered Davis, his spotter, peering through the FLIR scope attached to his modified M110. Large heat signature, moving southeast. It's not a moose. It's not a bear either. Monroe nodded once, signaling with 2 fingers. Move silent. Stay tight. Eyes up. They had trained for this. The mission brief called it the Non-Human Biological Entity Recovery Operation. But everyone on the team knew the truth. They were hunting a cryptid, a myth, a creature the public still thought was just blurry footage and bad cable shows. They were hunting the Bigfoot. Subject Entity 17B had been flagged on and off for the last 3 months. Spotted along logging roads, leaving 22-inch long tracks through fresh snow, even once triggering a motion camera near a hunting cabin. And now, finally, Command had satellite visuals. This was the closest they'd ever been. The forest around them grew unnaturally still. No bird song, no movement. Even the wind seemed to hush. "We're close," Davis muttered, kneeling to inspect a deep recent footprint. 5 toes, no claw marks, 45 degrees inward gait. Weight estimate, nearly 800 pounds. Monroe clicked his comms. "Team Bravo 4 to Eagle Command, we've got fresh prints, big ones. Confirmed thermals, target may be close. Requesting drone support and perimeter lockdown." The radio crackled for a second before a voice replied, tight and precise. "Copy that, Bravo 4. UAV en route. You are weapons cold unless otherwise directed. Subject is to be sedated, not terminated. Repeat, sedated, not terminated." Monroe gave a tight smile. "Yeah, we'll see if it gives us the chance." Just then the forest erupted. A branch snapped. Something massive moved ahead, just out of sight. Trees bent, pine cones fell. The moose or something else? Davis raised his rifle, but Monroe grabbed the barrel and shook his head. "Don't. Not yet." Then came a sound none of them expected. A deep, guttural growl, long and resonant and impossibly low. Not quite human and not quite animal. The growl echoed off the trees like it had come from inside the earth itself. Davis dropped to a knee, heart pounding in his ears. "That isn't a moose," he whispered. Sergeant Monroe's hand went to the tranquilizer rifle slung over his shoulder. "Eyes sharp, fan out, tight delta pattern, stay visual." The team moved slowly through the dense underbrush, sweeping their lights in controlled arcs. The thermal scopes picked up heat, bleeding faintly from the tree trunks. Still no clear visual. Then they saw it. Movement, ahead and slightly to the left, just beyond the birch trees. Something stepped between the trees, massive and covered in thick, matted fur the color of forest mulch. It passed near a fallen tree, and for just the briefest moment, it turned its head toward them. 2 amber, intelligent eyes caught the light. "Visual confirmed. Subject entity," Davis swallowed, "is staring right at us." "Do not engage," Monroe said, raising his rifle, but not yet aiming. "Hold your damn fire." The creature grunted low in its chest, and then it moved. Faster than anything that size should have been able to. It vanished between 2 boulders in a blink, and the team sprang into motion. "Go, go!" Monroe shouted, pushing forward. They ran, jumping over logs and darting through saplings, across a frozen creek bed that cracked underneath. Every few seconds they caught a glimpse. Fur disappearing behind a ridge, a branch snapping in the distance, a long arm brushing aside a pine bough. Then David cursed. He tripped, going down hard, his foot tangled in a snarl of roots. I'm good, go." Monroe paused, conflicted. From somewhere up ahead came the thunderous crashing sound, then silence. Too much silence. "Subject stopped moving," whispered Torres, the team's youngest member. "Do you think it doubled back?" And then suddenly, a shape dropped from the trees above him. Torres screamed. The rest of the men turned, weapons raised. There was nothing there, just broken branches in the wind. "Torres is gone," Davis said hoarsely, panic in his voice as he scanned the treetops. The growl returned, closer now, circling them. Monroe toggled his comm, trying to reach command. "Eagle, come in. Subject entity has made contact. We are compromised. Repeat, Then the line went dead. Sergeant Monroe's breath fogged the cold air, heart hammering against his rib cage like a war drum. He moved carefully, sweeping the area where Torres had vanished. No blood, no drag marks, just his rifle, snapped clean in half like a twig. "Eyes sharp. It's still here," Monroe whispered. Davis flicked on his infrared scope. "I'm not seeing anything. Wait. Movement. High. Tree line. Due west." The red thermal signature darted out of frame before he could lock it. Another blur to the north, and then again behind him. Too fast, too fluid. "There's more than one," Davis whispered. "Negative," Monroe replied, though his voice cracked. There's just one. It's messing with us." And that's when the rocks began to fall. Small at first, pebbles and bits of shale bouncing off helmets and gear. Then a boulder the size of a car door smashed down 10 feet from their position. They spun around, weapons raised. A deep howl shattered the silence. Primal, furious. And then another, this one farther away, and then another, closer. Davis looked at Monroe. "You sure there's just one?" "No," Monroe admitted. "I'm not." The squad fell back in a triangle formation, guns sweeping every angle, the forest floor littered with their steps, the night air vibrating with an oppressive sense of being watched and followed. Then something hit Davis from behind. Monroe turned just in time to see his second in command being yanked into the brush, his screams echoing through the trees before cutting off suddenly, horribly. Then came the silence, more terrifying than any sound. It was that moment when Sergeant Monroe realized that they weren't the hunters anymore. They were prey. Monroe and the remaining operative, Private Keller, they ran, abandoning protocol, branches whipping across their faces as they fled blindly through the forest. The drone uplink had gone dark, comms were down, GPS was scrambled. "We're not going to outrun it," Keller gasped, stumbling. "Keep moving," Monroe barked, grabbing him by the collar. But they didn't get far. Standing directly in their path was the subject entity. It was taller than they'd thought, easily over 9 feet. Its body was thick with muscle and fur matted with dirt and what looked like blood. It stood still, breathing heavily and watching, studying them. Monroe lifted his rifle. "Back up, I will drop you," the Sasquatch growled, not in fear, but in warning. Behind them, another growl answered, then another. They were surrounded. Keller's voice cracked. "We're in the middle of a hunting pack." Monroe didn't lower his weapon, but his hands began to shake. The creature took one slow step forward, and then everything went dark. Inside the operations room of the facility black dome, a cold artificial glow from rows of screens illuminated the gathered personnel. Massive wall monitors displayed topographical maps, satellite feeds, and a rotating series of encrypted telemetry data. The air buzzed with quiet urgency. Colonel Maureen Kellis stood at the head of the command table, stone-faced. Next to her was Commander Lyle Nash, his face ashen and grim. A crimson light pulsed at the edge of the briefing room, indicating high-level containment protocol, the kind used only when things had gone wrong. Very wrong. Let's start from the top, she said, voice sharp. Status report on Bravo 4. A tech analyst, sweating beneath a headset, adjusted his mic. Ma'am, we lost drone footage at 0509Z. Visual disruption originated from an EM burst localized within a 200-meter radius of their last known coordinates. It's the same signature as the Redwood anomaly. Another officer, Major Danvers, spoke up next. Final biotelemetry from Bravo 4 showed elevated cortisol and heart rate spikes across the team. Last recorded comm was Sergeant Monroe yelling, "Contact, northwest tree line," then total blackout. Kellis folded her arms. Casualties? Unknown. No retrieval signal. We've initiated search protocol, but... He hesitated. But what? Ma'am, this isn't just an encounter. This was an ambush, and we believe there were multiple entities. Silence fell across the room. The lights dimmed slightly as the director of operations, Dr. Harlan Vicks, entered. Tall, pale, and eerily calm, Vicks exuded an unsettling air of detachment. He adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses and then spoke without greeting. We warned against sending in conventional teams. They do not understand the terrain or the intelligence level we're dealing with. Kellis bristled at this. They were our most seasoned recon unit. Vicks ignored the tone. And now they're likely dead. If the subject entities are coordinating, we're no longer observing an isolated cryptid. He tapped a remote. A screen blinked to life, revealing a satellite image. Grainy, infrared. A massive bipedal heat signature near the Colorado-Wyoming border. But something new appeared nearby. A second shape, larger and more blurred, with a strange radiating patterns around it. This was taken 36 minutes ago. Not one, but two distinct heat signatures. The second is unlike anything we've documented before. Kellis stared at him. What are we looking at? We're not sure, Vicks replied, but if I had to guess, we're looking at an alpha. Commander Nash leaned forward. You think it's leading them? I think we've mistaken a species for a scattered anomaly, Vicks said, and we've just provoked a response. Colonel Kellis turned to the room. I want all satellite eyes on this area. Prepare a retrieval team, but make no contact until I say so. No more cowboy tactics. She looked back at the image, jaw clenched. Bravo 4 may be gone, and I want to know what happened to him. In a separate corridor, deeper in the facility, red lights flickered on in front of a massive containment chamber. Inside the reinforced glass stood something tall, nearly 8 feet, covered in dark, matted hair. Its face had a strange, intelligent hybrid between man and beast. It didn't pace. It didn't roar. It simply watched. As the red lights turned to green, the creature tilted its head and smiled.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I hope you'll join us next week for another installment of Hank Dillon, Bigfoot Hunter. And until then, have a great week, everyone.